Hola, yo soy Carlos.
Y yo, Miguel.
Welcome to Puente Bridge.
Stories that connect us. This is Puente Bridge. My name is Miguel Hernando Torres Umba. Bienvenidos. Today's episode will introduce us to alternative music by Latinx artists from Latin America and from the UK. Our guest of today is Callum Simpson, a DJ and music promoter, co-founder of Movimientos. His family comes from the north of England and Scotland, but he was born in London, a city where he fell in love with the Latin American culture and has spent his career and life championing it in this country. That's right. Our interview with Callum reminded us of La Fania All Stars, a musical group of the 60s and 70s formed in New York to showcase the musicians of La Fania Records, the leading salsa music record label of the time. Just as with La Fania All Stars, many of the musicians that work with Callum are immigrants of Latin American descent who, in the city where they live, New York or London, continue to embrace their Latin culture, create new sounds, and broadcast them to the world. So, without further ado, here it is, our interview with Callum Simpson. And welcome back to Puente Bridge. Now, imagine creating a movement of people, a movement of color. Imagine falling in love with something that you're not familiar with, but then becomes so intrinsic in your life. You spend your entire life vibing for it and creating that movement that brings people together. And that is exactly what our guest of today has been doing in his life. So would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Miguel. My name's Callum Simpson, aka DJ Jader. I've been running Movimientos for 15 years now, crazily. And we are an organization that specializes in Latin American music, but covers lots of different bases of global music, and is also a label, an agency, and multifaceted. We have a podcast ourselves for a long-running show on SOAS Radio, and I myself do various radio shows, and so there's a lot of things going on. But Movimientos is the main part of my life.
Yeah, thank you. So Movimientos, again, it's also been part of my life. Movimientos for me, when I came to the country and as I've been in this place, I've also attended many of the events, and I've seen music, alternative music that I'm probably...
And let me say, you bring a great vibe to the events as well.
We like dancing a lot. It's a really good, fun night.
It's always a better party with Miguel.
Thank you. Yes, well, it is great night. It's a great music. It's really lovely people that come to the events, and also music, alternative music that probably I wouldn't have heard for a long time otherwise if it wasn't through the events. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about some of the nights that happen with Movimientos and a little bit more detail of what Movimientos does?
Essentially, the main thing we do is events. And as I said before, we've also dabbled in label and releasing artists and radio shows. But the main thing is live music, DJs, and showing films and other cultural aspects. So it's quite kind of broad.
When did Movimientos start?
It started 2005. Initially was very linked to some of the solidarity movements here with Latin America. Sometimes to raise funds for some organizations, NGOs and charities, principally to raise awareness of a lot of the political situation that was happening over there, but also to create a great party to go with it. You know, the old adage of it's not my revolution if you can't dance to it. So I felt that was a really important combination to communicate social change and change people's perceptions of politics, of our culture, and vibrant music as well. And also an open-minded policy to the music. I think this has been one of the key things that we specialize in is a fusion. And you probably never know what you might get there's a little element of surprise.
Yeah.
I think that's quite important. And to mix it up, to be somewhere between traditional, salsa, cumbia, and then the sort of new wave that's happening. And we've always tried to sort of straddle both worlds in terms of the releases and also the DJ mixes or radio shows that we're putting out. And it's that mix of tradition and forward-looking music that's been really integral to our approach.
Why the Latin music? Or why would someone choose to go into a Latin culture?
Yeah, I mean, my personal journey was really as a DJ growing up in London, sort of an ordinary life growing up in London, listening to drum and bass, hip hop, kind of a lot of these styles of music. I was really into club culture, I suppose, growing up. From going to indie clubs to, as I said, drum and bass or techno. And at university, I started collecting records. And I think when you start getting into rare grooves and black music from the United States, and then you realize you start seeing the connections with a lot of Latin music and disco. And then you start hearing Blue Note records. And then Blue Note have a connection with Brazil and Latin music. And when you start joining the dots, you realize everything is connected and that Latin music has such a huge influence in the US, Mm-hmm. And for me, that was a really powerful realization. I suppose through DJs like Giles Peterson, obviously really influential because he's obviously a specialist in Brazilian music. And yeah, things like that, little seeds like that were really influential for me as a DJ. And then just started buying Latin jazz, there was groups from Europe who were playing a lot of Latin influenced music around the, noughties. And then you had drum and bass. There was a big Brazilian influence on drum and bass in the early noughties. There was a big movement there. In fact, I went to a night called Movement. It was most Thursdays at Bar Rumba. It was a sort of really great drum and bass night, really great atmosphere there. So yeah, that was kind of my sort of journey. And it was, I suppose, from my perspective, it was about sort of communicating Latin music through that different lens, I suppose.
There's a connection as well with it culturally and politically speaking, right?
Yeah, so Movimientos has the duality of being related to the political movements of the time in the mid-noughties when we set it up with my co-creator, Jess Crocker, and obviously has the dance rhythm connotations. But yeah, the seed of my interest politically was at university when I was studying. I had a Latin American module as part of a politics degree. Mm-hmm. And I had a really inspiring lecturer, I'll name check her, Julia Buxton. She's still active. Go find her on Twitter. She's really great. And she kind of got me interested in the subject. And obviously when you're learning about subjects like the dictatorships throughout Latin America, particularly in Chile, and I studied about Nicaragua as well, and the Sandinista movement, which was something that then I followed up with after university and volunteered with Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign.
Right.
So that was one of the sort of links in the chain that then helped us set up Movimientos, because I met Jess, who was also volunteering for Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign. And Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign hosted these Club Sandino events that had been super influential in the 90s, basically. And prior to that, during the 80s, when there was a big solidarity movement towards the Sandinista revolution. And what happened was that this was part of the history of, Latin music spreading in Great Britain. What was so fascinating was seeing all this, it was a huge network where a lot of these bands, Cuban bands and Central American bands, came to play. Mm-hmm. And they toured through the solidarity networks. And so I found that super interesting. And there was a couple of DJs called Max Reinhardt and Rita Ray, who are super influential on the sort of global music scene. And they were DJing at the Club Sandino. And they came to DJ on our first night ever at the Brixtonian in Brixton. And so the idea was to kind of take a little bit of that magic of Club Sandino and take it into a new generation and broader than just one country, and just have something that was all-encompassing for Latin America. And as you said, a place for people to meet and people to feel welcome and feel like there's a...
How does the Latin American crowd react to the events?
I mean, really positively. I mean, it all depends on what the event is. I think one of the crucial things that we, as I alluded to before, is not being too prescriptive about the music. And I think that it's also part of the key to some form of success, but it could be a potential pitfall because people like to go to a club night where they know exactly what they're going to hear, in general. But, the whole idea really was to challenge people a little bit. So you'd get the salseros that maybe might be a bit upset that you weren't playing salsa all night, But then you'd also play cumbia, and the reaction of some people at that time when we started playing cumbia in the mid-noughties. I mean, it's not like no one had been playing cumbia in the UK, but to the crowd that we were getting, people were like, oh, well, they really resonated, the Latinos and the British people, So as long as it was vibrant, then and you had an open-minded crowd, that I think that is the crucial element. One of the key things that we wanted to achieve was have a Latin night where you didn't have to dance. You didn't have to come along. And I think this is one of the big, say, stigmas of the salsa scene is that, you have these great nights where the bands are playing or the DJs are playing great music, but it can be very off-putting for certain people to go. And if they can't dance, it's like, what are they going to do? So I think that was part of the appeal. And we did have quite a few British salseros that came and were like, yeah, it's great. We get to, hear some hip hop and Brazilian music as well alongside that. So, and part of the ethos is also connecting up the continent. So it wasn't just the tropical as well. You could encompass elements from Argentina and other parts of the continent. But it doesn't, I mean, any club night, you're always going to get people, oh, why don't you play this? And you're going to play this. I mean,
I've brought friends who, when I said, cool, we're going to go to a Latin night, and then they come and it's probably not the Latin night they were expecting. So I think, yes, it's been challenging as well for some Latin people, but also opens the door.
Yeah.
It's more of a gentle entry, into the Latin culture, I would say.
Yeah, because I think, and this is part of our ethos as well. It's about exposing a deeper level of the culture, because so much of what we see here is this superficial, just the mainstream and then the samba with the the feathers and costumes, and it's just like and then tango and those cliches that you have. And obviously it's improved in the last 15 years. There's a deeper appreciation of a culture, but still, you're still challenging. Even now, you still have to challenge people, and probably even more so now. In the time that we existed, you've had the initial reggaeton boom, which was when we started, and so although we embraced some of that as well at the time, but it wasn't like we were a reggaeton night, and we always shied away from putting naked women on. That was never our, on the flyers. At the time, it was, and you don't even get that generally now, but at that time, you would have girls in bikinis, reggaeton night or whatever. That was it, and we had to avoid that. It was really important. And now you've seen the second wave of reggaeton, and it's just exploded hugely, which at the same time allows a whole new generation access to this culture, but then it also creates a whole bunch of new kind of stereotypes for people in a way, and it means you have to, even work hard to show people the alternatives. But there's always subcultures, and that's the great thing about the music, is that there's always subcultures coming through, and there's always interesting reggaeton, or you have the neo-perreo movement that's happening, there's and a lot of feminist reggaeton and stuff, and this for me is the stuff that is pretty important to champion.
Have you got strong ties with Latin American people?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, my current partner, the beautiful Teresa Juanique, is from Venezuela. So, yes, I have a strong tie at the moment.
Very strong heart tie.
I'll say that straight away. And, yeah, a lot of my friends, I mean, I threw myself into this world and just embraced it, and wholeheartedly. I love this culture now. I mean, it was a natural process. It was you know, a lot of the people that I've met and worked with just become friends. It's just natural. That's how life goes, isn't it? You know, and I've been so lucky to have been accepted by a lot of these people as someone, you know, without that background, and I've met so many people who have amazing generosity of spirit and warmth, and these are the characteristics that make, you know, the Latin American people amazing.
We were saying earlier, we were talking before we started about what it's given you. Yeah, what's Latin American culture given you?
I think it's enriched my soul. You know, possibly before we started Movimientos, I was probably quite shy. I was definitely not one to want to be on stage, you know, performing. I'm not like that really now, but I'm more open to it, and I'm a bit more outgoing, I think. I'm a bit more maybe expressive. I've been lucky enough to have so many friends that have, you know, influenced my tastes in food and clothes or whatever, you know. So many, you know, inspirational people.
When it comes to talented artists in the UK, is there a lot of them? Have you come across many talented artists?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, well, let's say we started working with live music artists in about 2007. And the idea, when we got invited by Notting Hill Arts Club to do a residency there on a Tuesday night, which was a super formative part of our process of, you know, starting to, and they were like, yeah, do it once a night, bring 3 or 4 bands. And their mentality was like, well, you just book these bands based on the indie model, you know, however many people they bring, they get paid. And I was like, it's not going to work it's not going to work like that, because these guys are like serious musicians. So we sort of cobbled it. We managed those nights somehow with that model, some of it, and sometimes through paying some of the more professional musicians. And those nights were just, I mean, for me, really formative in terms of my first experience of working with booking live acts. Sometimes we had great nights there, and sometimes we had really quiet nights. It was a Tuesday night. It was really difficult to bring people down. But it was also because it was that mix. It was like, but I think it was also no one else was doing that. You know, there was a time when the live music was dying a little bit. The Latin scene, the live scene was dying. I think. I mean, and you know, the salsa scene, for instance, was preferencing DJs over bands. You know, so there was a fertile environment for slightly alternative music, and you saw that through a lot of the creators and artists that were coming through at that time. In the late noughties, you had a lot of like really interesting migrant students and creatives types that were coming here around that time that maybe you don't get now. I think the interesting evolution is that it's obviously harder for the creative type to come from Latin America and play music and survive off music, or because there's less opportunities and it's just harder to be in the UK, straight up. But so at that time, there was a lot more possibilities, I think, and so you would get great bands, you know, Ecuadorian kind of alternative rock, sort of Venezuelan psychedelic bands. You know, there was all sorts. It was a really interesting time. There was loads going on, and also bands developing here. You know, that late 90s period was a really fertile period for people making fusions of music, and a lot of those artists, some of them were still working to this day, like Guara and Eliana Correa. But you had bands like Latin Dub Sound System mixing cumbia and reggae and hip hop. Brilliant group. And Los Chinches coming out of that second wave cumbia, or this new wave of cumbia that came out of that period. So it was a fascinating time. But yeah, so and obviously working as well at the same time with a lot of the musicians that had been here, I've come to realize and come to know a lot of the musicians who have been working here for 20, 30 years. You know, people like Sarah McGuinness from Grupo Lequito and her own bands, Cuban projects. People like Johnny Rodriguez, who's been doing Causaria Andean project and that has a cumbia band called Manzana Tropical. And Luz Elena and Wilma Cefontes have been playing music for God knows how long. I mean, you know, and so it's really interesting now because I think it's super important to support these kind of creators, and their cultural activism, that's how I see it, is so vital to the scene. But then the other thing that's happening is that you have second generation artists coming up, 20-something artists who are now creating something that's not necessarily rooted in Latin music, but they're tapping into their identity. Like artists like Desta French and Malena Zavela, and these people are embracing their identity, but also have a really fresh approach to making music, and it's so that's really exciting where we're at the moment.
Puente Bridge.
Stories that connect us. If you're loving this podcast, check out our previous episode with Diego Nájera, a young entrepreneur from Ecuador and the creator of the British Latino Network, only here in Puente Bridge. The Amazon rainforest is being destroyed at an unprecedented rate. Between August 2019 and July 2020, the deforestation grew by 10%. In just 1 year, 11,088 kilometers of rainforest were wiped out. That is the equivalent of 2,050 football fields. And while it may seem that there is nothing we can do from far away, by taking simple actions like recycling, reusing, or upcycling, you can help save the lives of millions of species, including ours. The planet and future generations will be grateful for it.
Puente Bridge.
Stories that connect us. Can we talk about a bit more about the history maybe of acts that Movimientos has had and people you've brought from Latin America, but also some of the acts that you've been able to present to the audience here?
The brief sort of history following the Notting Hill Arts Club residence that we had from 2007 to 2011, that evolved into different residencies at places like Passing Clouds and Hootenanny. Passing Clouds ran till 2016. It was an amazing venue and a brilliant place for a cultural hub. And Hootenanny is a big grassroots music venue supporting global music, you know. And I think this is the key, is that, and I was talking about that earlier, the venues have been really important to this process. We've also worked with Rich Mix. We've done 10 years of New Year's Eve parties there. So, so there's been, in that time, we've done countless local artists. It's been an incredible journey working with all of those venues. We've done, particularly a Rich Mix, we've had a lot of international acts, you know, more recently, Perote Chingo, we had Dononete from Brazil, really amazing artist. We had a young group from, one of my favorite gigs was a group called Afro Cidade. It was an incredible gig from Bahia. We did shows for Chico Trujillo, their first ever UK show. I mean, for me, that was one of the highlights as well. That was actually for part of our 10-year anniversary. And because of the history of Chico Trujillo and they're quite a political band, it was quite important, and it resonated a lot with me, with coming from Chile. We've worked at Village Underground as well. Gigs like Baiana System, huge. We did their UK debut. And that was a collaboration with Mama Sound, Brazilian female promoters. Yeah, countless shows. I mean, more recently, Chancha Via Circuito, DJ Set, Miss Nina, you know, Pereo artists, La Perla from Colombia.
How do the art acts
in Latin America react when you reach out to them? Is it for them like a big gig? Like, is it for them very important to come and play here? Do they always feel like, wow, we're playing in London?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's always something that's really perplexed me is the capital involved in playing in London. It's always a bit like, well, people really want to play here. It's like they want to play Glastonbury, they want to play in London. It's really powerful for artists to then have said they've played here, and which I find, bizarre. And I, in some ways, I embrace London as well. I love London, but it bemuses me why we have such.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Like, so how you roll as a promoter is very important for those bands to be able to come to this play and have this platform. Really, it is true. It's a big arena for anybody that comes. But then, therefore, the role of the promoter is very important in order to be able to facilitate. Yeah, well, that's spaces.
It. I think it's also maintaining those relationships with the venues, that the venues trust in you as a promoter. And I think having those access to those spaces is a privilege as well, because it's limited. But I think it's really important if a band's looking for a date on a tour and you can fit them in at a certain space like Hootenanny, where maybe they don't need to sell a lot of tickets. It's a different kind of arrangement at that venue, and it's not all based on the profile of the act. Some acts would struggle. I think that's where some of the gigs I've really enjoyed have been the ones with lower profile gigs, where bands that played to small audiences, even in Latin America, but they're fantastic acts, and you can put them in venues to big audiences. It's been a huge, as I mentioned, Afro Cidade band. I mean, they're getting bigger and bigger. But, we've had loads of bands from Colombia that is a similar kind of profile. And bands like La Perla. And I think that's a real joy for me, is just being able to connect those up. And also try to get them gigs in Bristol or Manchester, or just help with that. I think that's really important. So yeah, that's why I think maintaining and having those relationships with the venues is really important.
Having that access to the venue and that trust from the venue is something easy. Do you think that like Latin bands here or Latin promoters here would have access to that trust from the venues? Would they be received in the same way as you've been, for example?
It's a good question. I mean, quite often some bands will not be able to promote their own gigs because some venues don't want to take on a band. They want a promoter to help promote the show. And I think that's where it's important for us to really have a great relationship with the artists, so that we can actually be mutually beneficial to each other. And I think those are the bands that I like to work with, are the ones that, obviously some bands can just do their own shows, and that's fine. But, for me, it's about nurturing that relationship with the artists. And that goes for the international artists as well. It's about having strong connection with those groups already, whether that's playing it on my radio show, whether playing their music. So there's already a connection established, and then it's a natural place for them to come to us, But yeah, in terms of, I think our role needs to be, and this is something going forward, is to help empower other local upcoming promoters and open up the access. I think this is a big issue.
Is there many promoters, Latin promoters?
I mean, the strange thing is that there's been no one really. When we started out, there was a couple of guys who were doing more alternative and Latin alternative. So at that time, in the sort of mid to late noughties, that Latin alternative, I think, was not that accessible because it incorporated a lot of rock or rock in Espanol and things like that, as well as, say, cumbia and hip hop and whatever. And I think probably my perspective is being British, looks at it as how we can reach those British audiences.
Right.
And I think that, I guess, having to look at where we've been successful is reach those wider audiences. And I think that sort of Latin alternative sound was very niche. And yeah, whilst it could work in, say, the US with a huge diasporic, community,
Latin
and
diaspora, yeah.
Then it made sense, and in certain parts of cities across Latin America. But I think where we've succeeded is to try to distill that alternative spirit and kind of make it accessible for people here. And I think that's really crucial. I think, that's where it's useful. Yes, you can say this is a white guy doing British music, and you can criticize that. And of course, this is something I entertain and acknowledge. And I think it's a really important thing for me to constantly question myself. But we have to acknowledge also that as long as we have strong partnerships with members of the community and other and artists who are rooted in the community, I think that's a really important dynamic to have. If you're just a promoter that's just taking and profiting or whatever, then that's not going to work, and it's not going to fly with the Latin American community. But it also relates to how Britain relates to its Latin American connection.
Yes,
I feel it comes back to why there's a lack of recognition for the Latin American community here. You could say Britain has never acknowledged publicly really its involvement in the region, and it's up to his eyeballs in neo-colonial, whether that's via tacit government support of certain governments, or whether it's through nefarious corporate influence, in the region. We are absolutely up to our eyeballs in it. So, and have been since the colonial era. So there's a weird, unacknowledged thing going on there that I think, and I'm not seeing that happening anytime soon, to be honest, especially with this government. Sorry, quite political, but so the point is that I think as a British promoter, white British promoter, it's really important to address some of these issues through our events or make those connections, and whether it's through some of the events we've done with War on Want or Alborada in the past, I think connecting up issues that are happening in Latin America with what's happening here and building that solidarity is really important. And most of the artists, I would say, that we work with are on that sort of same wavelength, That really resonates for me, and I like to work with artists who are trying to shout loudly, from Manu Chao to whoever. I think we started our first night at Hootenanny was with Manu Chao.
Oh, right.
And he raised money for the Native Spirit Foundation, which promotes indigenous cinema and film festival around indigenous culture. And he came after a big headline show, came down to play at Hootenanny in 2008 after Lovebox and played. It was a legendary night. He played for like 2 hours. And before that, we had like 3 traditional bands from Peru, from Colombia, from Bolivia. It was an epic night. And that was preceded our sort of Hootenanny residency. And
Hootenanny is keeping and you're keeping, because last night you did an event.
So Hootenanny is doing a socially distanced series of speakeasy concerts where we had the quite difficult task of keeping people seated whilst Conjunto Sabroso were playing, and we had a really good night. But it should continue, and that's fingers crossed.
Is there more events going?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to continue hopefully there if there's not an additional tiered lockdown, and we're planning something at the Jazz Cafe. Hopefully that's coming.
Is there any in the horizon, any international?
No, because we're part of what I did initially, because we had several concerts lined up that were for the spring that was postponed to autumn, and now most of them have been rescheduled for next year. One for October next year, and we have a show with Love Carnival, which is a club night that we created in 2015, and that was its 5-year anniversary. Will be its 6-year anniversary by the time it comes around next year, and that's with Dengue and El Búho. Yeah, but there's huge demand for that show because both those artists are really important right now. And so that's one to look forward to when we come back.
When the time is right. I just love so much your knowledge of all these groups and Latin. And when you start mentioning people, I'm like, I've heard of them. I don't, why? So
thank you, right?
Yeah, but again, once I don't know them as much as you do. And I think I do love that. You know, seeing. I think for me, it's always inspiring when I see people who've fallen in love with, you know, seeing knowing so much of it. I know you've also traveled a lot in Latin America. It's also refreshing, and it feels good to feel welcome. And I guess that's what it is. And I mean, for me personally, with you and with your events, but also with your love with it, I feel welcome, and I feel like we are building that bridge. There's a partnership. There's a connection. As I said, I've enjoyed the nights, but also I enjoy your knowledge of music, and also the fact that you bring all these people, and I find a home within it of the little pockets that could become home in this city. But I also, as you said earlier, and I thank you for saying, I bring my energy to it, and you say, well, you know, probably. Yeah,
well, thank you for your kind words. It really means a lot coming from you, and I think, I mean, that is our aim, to create spaces, and I think that's the most, any community activist will tell you that's what they, create those spaces that people feel welcome is really important and vital.
Before we go, would you share with us some of the plans for the record label that you...
So the lockdown was quite an interesting time for analysing what we stood for and how to go forward. And the record label side of our work was not front and centre, so it was a good opportunity to revisit that. And we've got a couple of releases coming up. Really excited with a sort of Brazilian remix EP coming up from the Fontanas, and there's a great new, I think I can say this, a release from a young band called The Collectiva. Well, actually, it's mixed generation, I should say, but all female Afro-Latin jazz, which is really strong. Got a single coming up from them, and there's a compilation that we've curated that's almost there, which is going to be called Sanctuary or Santuario. And that is a compilation of contemporary Latinx artists from the UK.
Oh, wow.
It's going to be a mix of cumbia, hip-hop, jazz and electronic music. So yeah, it's good. It's really exciting, and there's 6 exclusive tracks there. But the idea behind that was to raise some money for the Latin American community that have been affected by COVID,
Right.
So yeah, this is all exclusive.
Exclusive, nobody knows.
First time announcing this in public. So
public in Puente Bridge. There we go.
Wait for it. It's got some great tracks. It's gonna be good.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Really value your work here.
There we go. Well, thank you very much. That was Carl Jader, DJ Carl Jader. Thank you. And that was our interview with Callum Simpson. If you want to discover new Latinx artists and listen to some Latinx alternative music, follow Movimientos on all their social media platforms. For upcoming events and news on releases, check out their website movimientos.co.uk. And in the description of this podcast, you can see a full list of the artists and music that Callum mentioned in the interview. That's right. And one last thing. If you like our podcast, please recommend it to a friend and go to our Instagram and Facebook, Puente Bridge Podcast, and leave us a comment. We would love to know what you think. Puente Bridge Podcast is produced by Umba Film and Media, created by Carlos Osa Valencia and Miguel Hernando Torres Umba. Sammy Fiorino is our associate producer, Nelson Cruz our community manager, the graphic design is by Fabian De Asa, and the music for this program was provided by Movimientos. My name is Miguel Hernando Torres Umba, and I'll catch you on our next episode of Puente Bridge Podcast. Stay tuned.
Yamile played the flute like it was meant to be. Beethoven to birthday to you, Moody. She came to England thinking she'll be fine. Landed with her application in hand, but a few pounds were missing in the bag. No explanation, application denied. She got stuck in London town with no papers and no reason why. Tell me where is the humanity that my parents they told me? Tell me where did it get stuck on one of those pictures? Tell me where is the equality that my elders they told me? Tell me where.
Yamila played the flute to pay her rent one night at a charity event. Officers start pushing to the first row. Without waiting for the end, they push her to the floor. Yamila never found out why she got shut down through the crowd. She was forced onto the plane with no money and no time to explain.
Papeles que cruzan fronteras, papeles que nadan y que vuelan. Díganme lo que quieran, que yo tengo pies para caminar.
Papeles que a mí no me definen, papeles para el mundo entero. No, no, no.
Díganme lo que quieran, que yo tengo pies para caminar.
Si tú te piensas que los papeles tienen la libertad y la verdad, estás equivocado.
Díganme lo que quieran, que yo tengo pies para caminar. Prohíbanme lo que quieran porque ya ya me voy. Prohíbanme lo que quieran, que yo tengo pies para caminar.
There's a question that's lurking beneath the chant. How come money can travel but people can't? Yeah, you can PayPal but you can't come here to the frontier to riot, rummage, slum it and bum here. Weird. What made the jungle in France? Could it be the war and terror or did they get there by chance? HMS Task Force, Iraq War Inferno, orders the outside, also the internal. Have you seen the new census? It's census, the plant manufacture consensus. How do you like borders? Tight or tighter? How do you like Britain? White or whiter? This catalyzed my existential crisis. Is this a typo or a slight glitch? Like am I white British or white other? I'll write other, but yo, what the f is other? Enough of that, I'll just jam with these other cats. My brother with the dirty sacks, move in a mongrel pack. What makes immigrants? Borders. Who makes borders? Forgers, claiming the land of the former. A horde of marauders, ordering organs of torture. Reported 99% of reporters are formless and help the force like it's a matter of course. It's pure madness. A green card, you're damn mad. The US Constitution is written on the land grab, a sad fact. Seems freedom still an abstract, an excerpt, a well-worked theme from an extract. Can it be so distant? Word from on high. Imagine there's no countries, it's easy if you try. But Jader, I'm trying still with mad love and patience. It seems the government just imaginations.
Levántate, mi hermano, bájate. Levántate, despiértate. Levántate, lo digo del corazón. Flesh and bone, mind, body and soul. Levántate, mira, despiértate. Levántate, abre tus ojos. Levántate, es tiempo de aprender. Flesh and bone, mind, body and soul. Levántate, piensa tú mismo. Levántate, es tiempo de aprender. Levántate, cada día. We are flesh and bone, mind, body and soul. Levántate, así. Levántate, levántate, lo digo del corazón. We are flesh and bone, mind, body and soul. Levántate.
Want to bridge.
Stories that connect us.